Hi, this is Irving Steele, your host of Local Issues, and today we're really excited to have a local leader in the community who has been outspoken and showing his heart and soul into the community to try and make the community a better place, and really grateful for him for taking the time today. So welcome Joshua Kelly, the leader of TVCCA. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Irv. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, and we were just talking that we have different ties and connections.
Yes, we do.
Growing up in this area, and I'm always impressed that you're leading this $40 million nonprofit here in southeastern Connecticut, and at the same time you're able to really show who you are to the community through passion and posts and writing and all these different things. How do you do it?
Whew, that's a $64 million question. It's difficult. It takes a lot of time and energy, and that's just working on the nonprofit. Yeah. I'm somebody who is an elected official in my community. I have been involved with local government and politics, really since I was in grad school back in 2015, so a decade now. And I've always been somebody that from a very young age who really couldn't hold back, bite my tongue, and not say the thing that was on my mind. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it's just second nature to me to be that outspoken person, and I think that there are some people who really appreciate that about me. There are some people who probably wish, and this may include, people who are associated and work with me in TVCCA that wish that maybe sometimes I would hold my tongue a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is I have always been somebody who is drawn to trying to help people. Mm-hmm. And that comes in a lot of different ways. It comes through running for office. It comes through, nonprofit management. And right now, and I know that you've developed some questions that I'm really excited to get into, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But right now in the nonprofit sphere, it's really hard to disentangle the question of politics and what a community needs. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to try and figure out what's a partisan issue and what's not a partisan issue in today's day and age. All of a sudden, everything feels hyper-partisan, even down to how our nonprofits fundraising, spending money and connecting with their communities. Mm-hmm. So as a nonprofit leader, I'm supposed to not necessarily have a lot of be that outspoken, but in today's day and age, I think we're evolving to a point where I really need to be. And I think that I'm better able to serve the southeastern Connecticut community through some of that.
Okay. And maybe we can take a step back to, as you said, kind of what the community needs.
Absolutely.
And I feel like this is something that shouldn't be so divisive. We kind of look at some of the issues, look at things going on, and you're at the forefront of all this. So maybe you could explain a little bit more about your organization, Please. TVCCA, kind of in the communities that you're serving.
Absolutely. So TVCCA, we've been around 60 years this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I have not been here for all 60 of those years. But
you look good for your age.
Thank you. But it's really a wonderful organization. The federal government back in 1964, we passed and signed the Economic Opportunity Act, which created a series of both public and private non-profit community action agencies, also sometimes called CAP agencies, and every town, every municipality across the country belongs to one of these. So southeastern Connecticut, we have TVCCA. Mm-hmm. Up in northeastern Connecticut, they have Access Community Action Agency. A little bit to our west, they have CRT, Community Renewal Team. So we have 9 in the state of Connecticut. TVCCA is one of those, and our charge through that act is to abolish poverty. That's a
bold.
Tall order. That's bold.
Yeah.
And it's all part of the war on poverty, mm-hmm. as Kennedy and Johnson saw it back in the day. And there was a time of bold leadership and bold thinking, and also hard to, I think, separate a lot of the work that I do from politics when we were founded out of a political movement.
Exactly.
But here we are. We're founded out of a political movement. 91% of all of our funding is either federally or state based. Mm-hmm. So 9% comes from towns and private foundations and donations.
Of the 91%, how much is that federal versus state? Do you have
70% is federal.
70% is federal funding.
Yeah. Now, some of that comes as kind of a pass through to the state. They give the state money and then the state gives it to us. But 70% originates from the feds and only 21% originates from the state itself.
Wow.
Which all in all, actually kind of mirrors how we spend our taxes, right? Most of our tax dollars go to the federal government, some goes to the state, and so forth. Our agency has, I think, done a great job over those 60 years of moving the dial. Back in 64, we had a poverty rate across this country almost pushing 20%. Now we're down to about 10%. In Connecticut, it's a little bit lower, depending on where you are, maybe 8 or 9% on average.
New London County is about that.
Yeah, exactly, right in that ballpark. And we're keeping people from slipping back into poverty. But a lot of the question that we're trying to answer now is, what do we need to do in order to further the mission and really get it down to zero, to abolish? And the answer can't be status quo, because we've been doing that for 60 years and we haven't gotten to zero. And the answer also can't be to remove all the funding and cut all the programs, because that's going to bring us back up to 20+%. So, where do we go? And I think to your point, it's a question of community need, but it's also a question of just what kind of future we want the community to have. We could say, hey, everybody, keep your money, do whatever you want with it. Let's have a true free market. The state doesn't need to be involved with any type of charity. But at the end of the day, that's been tried before in history, and we've seen that there are always going to be people in a laissez-faire style economy that are have-nots, that are never given the opportunities of other people. So our agency is designed to try and help build opportunity, to try and help put people in a place where they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, where they can get a job and work hard in order to afford housing, in order to be able to do all of these things. And yeah, there are some programs that are designed to help support people in pursuing that dream. But at the end of the day, the conversation I think we really need to be having as a country, and I don't think that we're having in a very kind manner at the very least, is are we actually accomplishing the goals that we want by cutting funding at the federal level for programs like this, or are we taking steps backwards?
And to your point exactly, that we've seen a lot of things in the news recently that federal funding is disappearing overnight for many of your programs. You mentioned right before we started that a senior program and program for veterans is being cut, unfortunately. And one other side of this too is that right now a lot of people say in this region, in southeastern Connecticut, there's a lot of nonprofits doing a lot of different services, a lot of different work. Maybe you could share a little bit, if you have an idea of kind of how many nonprofits are in this region and all that.
That's a really good question that I'm not sure I actually have a good handle on, but I appreciate it, because there are a lot of nonprofits, and I'll give you an example. Just in southeastern Connecticut alone, we have multiple nonprofits that administer a singular state grant called Rapid Rehousing. We are one of them. We have other multiple nonprofit partners that are administering it out of different parts of the state. We have a subcontractor that works with us out of Wyndham, and other different parts of the nonprofit community really come out of the woodwork and are all pitching into the singular state effort to make sure that people have access to housing if they meet certain criteria. A lot of people, I think, assume that kind of a singular program would belong to one nonprofit, or in a lot of cases that a singular program would belong to the state. But in fact, because of how vast some of these programs are, because of how complicated they are, and how ingrained some nonprofits are in certain communities and others are in others, it really takes this intricate network and web in order to make these programs work. Are there inefficiencies in that? Yes. But
at the same time, one thing that I think that you do really well is having these kind of innovative partnerships and filling in the holes where other organizations can't. Want to share some of that?
Absolutely. So even on the housing side of things, for example, this winter in Norwich, we had the city council bring us in, and a TVCCA in particular, in and say, we don't have a place where individuals can go if they are unsheltered and homeless, in the event that there is a cold weather emergency. So every winter the governor declares overnight, cold weather emergencies. People are supposed to be able to get some level of shelter. No one's supposed to go freeze and die out in the cold.
This is America.
This is America, right?
Greatest country on earth. We should take care of our citizens.
In one of the richest states in the country, in the richest country on earth in history, we should be able to get everybody in a warm place. So that was the mission, but we pulled together, I mean, we had conversations with Reliance Health, we had conversations with St. Vincent de Paul Place, the city was a huge part of this, the United Way helped provide us funding. It took a village to build the infrastructure that was needed just to administer this one temporary, not even continuously operating program. So we only opened it on the nights where there was a cold weather emergency because we had limited funding. But just to make that happen, it took at least 5 major agencies that are all-star hitters in southeastern Connecticut to get this up and running. But
a lot of collaboration.
A lot of collaboration, and it really helped because there were individuals at Reliance Health who knew, as clients were coming in, hey, this is someone who struggles with perhaps certain types of behaviors. We had some conversations, of course, with St. Vincent de Paul Place. This is somebody who we have seen before. This is somebody who isn't known to us. We were able to get people enrolled in some of our data systems to make sure that they were being served on a continuous basis, that we kind of knew where they were, where are they living when they're not in the shelter. Collecting this data so that we're better able to serve them, report back on what the needs are to the state, so that as they're putting together new programs, we're able to very clearly say, yes, this is a need. No, actually, we're not seeing as much need in these categories, and share that data back to them.
And it seems like you do a lot of data reporting and collecting on all your programs to ensure that there's efficacy there.
Yeah, honestly, sometimes, and the data is very important. Like I said, there are practical applications to the data. Sometimes I feel like we end up doing more reporting than we do helping people.
Yeah.
So those aren't my favorite moments, but we also understand not just that, the data is important, but also that we're beholden to taxpayers, right? 91% of our funding is government funding. We know the importance of making sure that people know we're transparent. We have our independent audit every year. We are making these reports to ensure that the public dollar is going as far as it can, as efficiently as it can.
Definitely. And one of the things recently, I think you were on the front page of the local newspaper and different things. You were together with Congressman Courtney talking about some different programs that we might not see so much anymore. What are those programs?
Right. So this wasn't on my bingo card for 2025, but unfortunately the one program that we've had cut so far has been our Retired Senior Volunteer Program. It's called RSVP. It's a federal program administered by AmeriCorps Seniors, which is a federal agency. It's really unfortunate. I really didn't think that the federal government would go after senior and veteran focused programs so quickly. That seems to be an area where I mean, these are vulnerable populations. Everybody we work with is in a vulnerable population, but this is one that seems to be near and dear to more people's hearts across the political spectrum, put it that way. And it's only a $200,000 program a year. I say that, from the perspective of the federal government, where that's, less than a percent of a percent of a percent in the
rounding error of a rounding error.
Yes, exactly. And yet they still saw the need to take what really is an altruistic and very positive 25-year component of southeastern Connecticut's fabric. So it's heartbreaking from that perspective. And we have 2.5 employees, 2 full-time, 1 part-time employees that are part of that. And they also administer the Veterans Coffee Houses, which have become a bit of a national phenomenon. Actually, the first Veterans Coffee House that was launched a little over a decade ago was right here in eastern Connecticut.
That's great.
And yet the funding still is not flowing. There are other areas where we're very concerned. For example, the Boston office that oversees the federal Boston office that oversees both the Office of Head Start and all Head Start funding for preschool programming, as well as the Federal Low Income Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, has been closed, and now they're supposedly slowly bringing personnel back, but they will not necessarily be going back to the Boston office. So we don't know what that means, but the person on the other end of the computer who usually sends us money is not there to do that.
Wow.
LIHEAP for New and London County alone is a $10 million program, and it's giving to this is individuals who, it's a pretty high income threshold. So individuals who may even be full-time school teachers here in southeastern Connecticut. There are people who are on TVCCA's payroll because we don't bring in enough from the state and federal contracts that we have to pay everybody a living wage. There are people who work for TVCCA who qualify for some of these things. who are able to bring in up to $1,450 this year to help with energy, heating assistance, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So oil, natural gas, what have you.
People that can't heat their homes and apartments.
Right. And what I know we're going to see in the event that this program is cut, it's a domino effect, right? If you can't heat your home, it's not just about feeling a little cold at night. It's about pipes freezing. Mm-hmm. It's about not being able to shower and your kids going to school without being able to shower. Mm. It's about not having access to clean water in your home. It's about the repair costs because your pipes froze. It's about having to have your home winterized if you are proactive about it. There are so many ways that this can continue to cost people more and more money, sink them further and further into debt. And that's the way that our society right now just seems to be trending. We seem to be embracing, well, if you can't pay for it yourself, go into debt. Mm-hmm. We don't want to bail out individuals who are living paycheck to paycheck, but we're willing to bail out the large companies. And from an anti-poverty perspective, I feel we have it backwards. Mm-hmm. And I've tried, without being partisan, one party or the other, to make sure that voice is heard in this mm-hmm. community. And sometimes it's a little easier to do than other times. And as we continue to see more polarization on the political spectrum, it's getting harder and harder. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really important to note that. But in terms of programs, getting back to your real question of programs we're concerned about, Head Start, LIHEAP, we have pretty much any federal program that we administer, we're mm-hmm. concerned, we're looking out. The only one that we've heard is definitely going to be cut is RSVP. We'll see if the state wants to pick that up and potentially bring some more money to the table.
So that's potentially an option, that the state's going to fill in some of these holes when we're losing the federal funding.
It's a potential. This program, it's one of those things where it's so small that I'm a little worried in the grand scramble of creating the biennial budget that the mm-hmm. state's going to forget about it. But I'm also concerned that actually, I guess maybe I'm hopeful that it's small enough that, well, of course, we can spare $200,000 for TVCCA to continue a great program. So we'll see which way they land on that, but mm-hmm. it could go either.
Okay. So I imagine you're spending a decent amount of time in Hartford and talking with legislators to try and influence that a little bit. Yeah,
I actually had 2 separate meetings today with legislators. One of the really positive things that we have going, we have mm-hmm. a brand new program. It's called Family Bridge, and it's running primarily right now out of, really kind of 5 or 6 communities up north, including Norwich, Wyndham, Griswold, Lisbon, Montville, and our 2 tribal nations. It's universal nurse home visiting. So I had a kickoff event for that earlier today. Nice. Try and make sure that we are giving the help that we need to new parents, new families, and that they're not rushing off to very expensive emergency room visits for things that maybe could be solved sooner and with better health outcomes for children.
And then these are the different costs that the society has to take on.
Right.
Emergency rooms and all these different things.
Exactly. And right, that there are Medicaid dollars that are going to those emergency rooms. There are real tangible savings that we can see from implementing proactive programs like this. That's something that we launched today. We had 2 different legislators there as well as one of the state commissioners, and very grateful for that, and another conversation with some of our Norwich legislators around housing needs that they have. And that's just a little snippet of my day today, but every day's been trying to see, is there money for our RSVP program somewhere? Is there money for just nonprofits to be indexed to inflation so that we're always receiving some cost of living adjustment so that our ability to pay our employees doesn't keep going down? So many different pressure points on the legislature right now, and I'm trying to push all of them. Yeah. I say that with a lot of love for our legislators who might watch this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a $40 million nonprofit, it's a large organization, and let's say worst case scenario that some of these things that are coming down the pipeline, this funding is cut, this funding is cut, this funding is cut. What are the options? You said one thing is potentially that the state's going to fill some of these holes. Yep. Are you starting to think kind of more entrepreneurially of maybe more community support, company support? What are you thinking?
You hit the nail on the head. I think that there are let's see if I can go through all of these in my head. There are kind of 4 paths. There's the state picking up something that the federal government's dropped or vice versa. Doesn't seem likely that it would be vice versa in this climate, but that's always an opportunity maybe down the road. We'll see. there's private donations, individual giving, right? So we actually just hired a woman, her name's Sherry Perkins, who has been doing a phenomenal job of getting us set up with 60th anniversary fundraisers, trying to get some annual appeal letters out there, and her whole job is events and fundraising. It's proactive for TVCCA. We've never had somebody in a position like this before. And I think that we're all a little nervous about investing this kind of money when some money's going away, but you've got to invest in order to make money.
Yep.
So we've got the entrepreneurial spirit in that, and Sherry's been doing a wonderful job. And you're going to see more and more come out about our 60th anniversary events as we go through this next year, really having kicked it off in March.
It's a huge event. You have to
It is.
celebrate.
It is. We have to celebrate as
make it
best we
happen.
can.
Yeah.
And we'll have some really fun events. We've got a mini golf tournament coming up in June. We've got a music festival in September, so I'm looking forward to it. But so there you've got state funding, you've got individual giving, you've got corporate sponsorships. This is a tricky one because as government funding dries up and we go into more of a bear market in general, everybody is a little less giving. So whether it's a private foundation, whether it's a corporate sponsor, everyone seems to just be pulling back a little bit on the purse strings. And I don't know if that will be just a wait and see game to see where do we land in the next 6 months to a year, or is it going to be more of a long-term economic impact where we don't see money flowing, which only in turn is going to continue to hurt the economy. But time will tell. We don't necessarily have giant aspirations thinking that we're going to be saved by Electric Boat or Pfizer or any of those larger companies.
Potentially they could support.
We will absolutely accept it if somebody's interested. And we will be reaching out, especially about the RSVP program. We already have some feelers out to see if somebody might be willing to come in and make it the blank company RSVP program, sponsored by so-and-so. We would love to help advertise your company if you're interested in taking something like that on.
That'd be great.
The last option is that it goes away. And that's not to say that it would go away forever. And that's not to say that there aren't other great things that are happening in the community that we can still put our time and energy into. But we're looking at this RSVP program right now. May 7th is the last day. Technically, the last day of funding was March 31st. We are out of our savings, keeping our employees on board until that date to put in every effort that we can to try and raise this money, to try and find it, see if the state legislature bites. If we can't find it, though, that's it. Those individuals will go home, and we'll see if it can be revived at a later date, but it will be put on a shelf.
Yeah, and it's tough for your organization because you have, $5 million of reserves that you can only keep these programs going so long, and I think you're running at a deficit already, so it's hard to keep these programs going with your own reserves. So that's a huge challenge there.
You're right.
I'm curious, maybe some of this mindset shift for how you're raising money and working with companies and things, a little bit more entrepreneurial. I'm curious the whole thought of if you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day, but if you teach them to fish, then you potentially feed them for a lifetime. I'm curious if some of your programs are starting to kind of adopt some of this mentality to help raise people out of poverty.
Yes, they are. And it's been really heartening to me to see that. We recently went through a whole systems review really at TVCCA to say, and really look at our mission statement, look at our strategic plan. And we came to the conclusion that while our mission statement previously focused on the abolition of poverty, we need to really talk about systems specifically. We need to talk about what can we do as an agency to change the systems that are impacting and influencing people to go into poverty. And that's not an easy thing to tackle, but it involves more advocacy. It involves making sure that when I'm advocating at the state capitol, it's not just about, hey, we need the X dollars to fix the housing crisis in Norwich. It's about, hey, here are the ways that you can change the legislation to make sure that you are creating a more sustainable program. So that's everything from, something that I had a conversation about with some of our legislators today. We have an opportunity to use, maybe a couple $100,000 to help fix housing, the housing crisis in the greater Norwich area. Not a lot of money, so how do we stretch it as far as we can? And what we're doing to try and, find sustainability, because that's really what your question's about. You hand a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. It's about sustaining yourself. TVCCA is looking to sustain itself by, instead of continuing to shell out, potentially thousands of dollars to landlords, what if we took on some housing stock, we improved it, and then we were able to, over time, place dozens upon the scores, maybe hundreds of people in these housing structures while they're looking for more stable housing situations and jobs and so forth. Something going from a one-off opportunity with these dollars to now something that might be able to span decades. So that's something that we're looking at internally, but in terms of the way that we're working with our clients, we definitely have an emphasis within TVCCA on making sure that people have the skills that they need in order to succeed in the current market. That's through our manufacturing pipeline initiative. We have our JFIS program, a lot of different job and economic opportunity connections that we're making. But even with our Family Bridge program, the way, I don't think that a lot of people necessarily think of pulling oneself up by their bootstraps as being very related to child rearing. But having somebody that you can call to ask some medical questions about your child when you're a brand new parent, you're coming home, you've got a baby, nobody gives you an instruction manual. And if you went out and bought an instruction manual, it makes it probably sound a lot easier than it really is. So having that medical resource, a true nurse on hand that you can call, that will come to your house to visit with you, is making sure that you have the skills that you need in order to better succeed, so that you're not spending as much time out of work. One of the major reasons that we have absenteeism in the workplace, that we have people who aren't in the workplace in Connecticut, it's a measurable percentage, is because of childcare. So we're trying to make sure that people have access to affordable childcare. We're trying to make sure they have the resources to be able to be great parents themselves, keep their costs down, keep our systems up and running without huge expenses, at the emergency room and so forth. So many, and also to provide support for anxiety and postpartum depression. So many great health outcomes, just because we decided as a state to be a little more forward thinking in the way that we help new parents. What a great thing.
Yeah.
And what a very simple thing that we could have been doing for decades. But I really think over time you're going to grow generations of people that are more comfortable being parents, that are more educated and intelligent about the way that they're raising their kids. And it's going to pay dividends down the road. And I think the more that we can do that with all of our programs, so that every aspect of what TVCCA does and what the state's doing to support people is sustainable, the better off we're going to be.
Yep. Awesome. And I know you said over the last 60 years, we've been able to change poverty in this area from maybe 20% down to maybe 8-9% around there. Recently, I don't know if you've noticed, but driving on the streets, starting to see more homeless people, more people kind of asking for money and things like that. I'm curious of what you're seeing on the front lines already of just the last few months of what's going on.
Yeah, really since the pandemic. I don't necessarily have specific numbers by town, but since the pandemic hit, and this is partially because just the housing stock that we have in the area and the rush of people that we've had moving and so forth, and other economic factors, we have had an increase in homelessness. It's significant. I know that the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness is looking for, I believe it's somewhere in the ballpark of an extra $5 million to combat homelessness this year from the state government. And we're working hand in hand with them to get that money, because some of that's going to go to the warming shelter in Norwich to try and make that a perpetual happening and something that we're able to offer. But more and more we're also seeing in terms of demographics, it's not kids. I think that there's a stereotype around who's homeless, right? It's people who are mentally unwell. It's people who never got jobs and are lazy. We're seeing seniors who are retired, who aren't able to stay in the homes that they've lived in for so long because they can't keep up with the maintenance costs, because they can't pay the rent because the rent got doubled, and they never owned their own home. It's seniors who are going back to work. The number of people that we had to find transportation for to get them from the Norwich No Free Shelter to Mohegan Sun to work their full-time job, sometimes on third shift, is significant.
Wow.
And that was really moving. I actually had the opportunity at the No Free Shelter to, I volunteered overnight, one night right before Christmas Eve. And the number of really wonderful people that I met there was moving in and of itself. But the number of people that were there who had to manage their attendance at the shelter around their full-time jobs and still couldn't find affordable shelter, despite the fact that they had this money coming in and didn't see any hope of finding affordable shelter in the near future, was mind-numbing to me.
Wow.
So there needs to be more investment from my perspective. I understand that there are a lot of people in the country who are, I think, really upset that the dial hasn't moved in a while, right? Because we moved it from that 20% down to 8 or 9. Feels like we spend a lot of tax dollars to not get anything new out of it. I'm all for innovation, but you have to keep trying. You know, there are 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb, right? There's a quote from Edison that's something to the effect of, you know, I found 900 ways to not make a light bulb, but I found one that worked. So let's try something new.
And we just have about a minute left. So right along that point of where you're going, of a lot of people have this anxiety right now of they want to do something, they want to make an impact, they want to try and find new innovative ways, and they want to keep trying. I'm curious what you can tell our viewers. How can they get involved? How can they do something? How can they take some kind of action and support some of the things you're working on?
Well, before I jump into that, I'll preface this by saying, please don't take this in any partisan direction. However, run for office. However you run, it doesn't matter if you belong to the pizza party or, you know, pirate party, anything will go. But run for something. And if you're not able to run for something, find people that you really admire and tell them to run for office. We need more people who are involved, who are willing to speak truth to power. We need more people who are willing to think outside the box and be innovative. We need more people who are willing to stand up for programs that make sense, despite the fact that sometimes it costs money. And we need people with really big hearts that are out there. So, and if that's not for you, that's okay. But find somebody that you do admire and do what you can to support them. And anytime you have the opportunity to speak to your leaders about the things that matter most to you, just make your voice heard. Well,
thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today, Josh. It's a pleasure and grateful for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.